Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be getting started in just over a minute.
Hello and welcome to the fifth installment of the Shared Value Initiative's 2020 Speaker Series, Resilience Reimagined, and thank you for joining us. I'm Reimagined, the Director of Partner Engagement and Programs with the initiative and your host today. For those of you not familiar with us, we are part of FSG, a not-for-profit social impact consulting firm co-founded by Michael Porter of Harvard Business School and Mark Kramer. We are a global platform of leaders seeking to bring business solutions to help solve societal challenges. And as some of you know, we typically gather in person for our annual summit. But because of the pandemic, we've been gathering virtually and opened many of our events for 2020 to the general public. And in that spirit of providing access during this unique time, we hope that this session is useful to you and encourage you to join our network of members. So please feel free to reach out to me after the session for more information. So before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. As you know, we're webcasting virtually from our homes, so problems happen, and we ask or beg forgiveness for any technical difficulties. Everyone in the audience is on mute with their cameras disabled. We will have time for audience Q&A, so please feel free to submit those via the Q&A function. And if you're on social media, please use these hashtags and handles. Throughout our series, we've been exploring what Resilience Reimagined means in a variety of contexts and industries to rebuild systems that are adaptable, sustainable, and equitable. And we invite you to register for our next session, which will be next week, the 7th. That includes Shamina Singh of MasterCard and Rebecca Marmot of Unilever in conversation with our FSG colleague, Adib Mahmoud. And then another session on the 13th featuring Michelle Adkins of BlackRock in conversation with Ellen McGirt of Fortune. We believe now, more than ever before, it's important to hear and learn from experts about what it means to be purpose-driven. And we believe today, you'll have an engaging look at what that precisely means through the conversation with an extraordinary leader. So let me introduce our speakers. Adrian Gore is the visionary founder of Discovery in South Africa. And at the core of this company, with the aim to make people healthier by enhancing and protecting their lives, Adrian's vision has led to the largest global platform that creates behavior change, transforming insurance markets and financial services globally, all while concurrently making a significant share of the global insured population living longer, healthier lives. So welcome to Adrian. And Dr. Lauren Smith is our co-CEO at FSG, who has helped to drive the vision and growth of the firm and advance our mission of achieving equitable social impact at scale. Lauren recently accepted the newly created role of Chief Health Strategy and Equity Officer at CDC Foundation. And so she'll be leaving us at the end of this week. So it's with excitement mixed with sadness that I introduce her to you now, but we are thrilled that she'll maintain her ties to FSG by serving as one of our esteemed members, board members moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Lauren and Adrian, and I'll be back at the end of the close of the session. Lauren.
Hello. Hello all, and hello, Adrian.
Hi, Lauren. Nice to see you.
Good to see you also. And I'm so excited that we have this opportunity to connect and to have this conversation where this virtual fireside chat is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So I want to dig in if we could. And start off by asking you to tell folks who may not be familiar with your story a little bit about yourself and how you came to be where you are.
Well, Lauren, I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's actually quite a boring story. It's a fairly linear story, but I was born in South Africa and studied actuarial science to become an actuary out of school and into university. And then I entered the insurance industry, which is what you would expect of an actuary. But what was amazing, it was the time of kind of the change from apartheid into democracy with Nelson Mandela. And two things I think happened to me. One is kind of the societal change was both challenging but quite exciting. The other issue is just going into a big corporate environment gave me a sense of the power of corporations, that you can create real societal change if the corporation is a corporation for good. And I think both of those inspired me. And what happened to me is I kind of had this view at about 25, 26 of starting an insurance company, which is really not done. It's not an entrepreneurial, how can I say, a road that people travel, starting an institutional business.
What in the world made you think that you could start an insurance company? Can we just pause there? Where did that come from?
I joined an insurance company that was pretty progressive and very successful. It had done really well on the markets, and it kind of had a very inspiring culture. And it felt to me that if I could do the same, build something of that scale, myself, it would be something unbelievable. And I think that mixed with a change in the country created the sense of entrepreneurship. What was interesting is health insurance was not yet done in the scale, say it was done in the US by United Healthcare or the Blue Cross plans, etc. So we actually developed a product there, and this product just really took off and illustrated the demand for healthcare was so big for health insurance. And so I raised capital from an investment bank and started Discovery on this idea of building a kind of a health insurer from the ground up. And
Right.
That's a long time back. So that was the start of the company, which was quite different, I think, to other roads people may have traveled.
Well, you alluded to the idea that as you were doing this, South Africa was wrestling with its, history and legacy of apartheid, and was starting a transition, away from that. How did that change or have an impact on how you viewed the role of business in society, or what business could contribute?
Yeah, so it's a very important question. What happened to me was, as we started the organization, it really was built on a kind of a sense of qualitative issues. Although I'm an actuary by training, it wasn't built on business plans and capital. Of course, it had that, but the focus was an organization that would be of exceptional quality, add to society, etc. And as you say, as apartheid kind of moved to democracy, the question was how you build a health insurance company that was sustainable. South Africa has very, very complex problems, and at that stage particularly, too few doctors, terrible levels of disease burden. HIV/AIDS, as you know, is highest in the world. They're both infectious and non-infectious diseases. And then we had a kind of, which I think is right, in a country that had such discrimination, there was an obsession on the part of the Mandela government, rightly so, to have absolutely no discrimination. So from a regulatory standpoint, like Obamacare, you could not exclude people on pre-existing conditions. You'd have flat community ratings, so everyone paid the same rate. So actuarially, the problem was, how do you build a sustainable health insurance company? You can't manage care like the US with too few doctors. You can't manage risk because you can't price risk into the premiums. And so the kind of the epiphany we had was the basic hunch, which in the 90s wasn't a well-known thing, was could you kind of incentivize people to be healthy? Could we make people healthier? If we could do that, we could reduce the demand for healthcare, and we could offer a product to be felt was sustainable. And so right at the outset of the Discovery evolution was the idea of make people healthier. And we had this core purpose from the start, make people healthier. That was our purpose. And the entire kind of product structure, North Star of the organization from the get-go was on this idea of make people healthier. And I will tell you, and you probably know this, and at that stage, the idea of physical activity and those kinds of things. The correlations to lower mortality and morbidity was not well established. These things were still embryonic. The idea of behavioral economics and, the biases and how people make choices wasn't well known. We had a hunch that if we could incentivize people to be healthier through the actuarial profits would emerge, we'd build a sustainable company. And so we developed this simple idea of vitality. Do healthy things, earn points. The points give you a status like an Air Miles program, and the status give you all kinds of rewards. And crucially, would let you pay less for healthcare if you engaged in them. And that was the kind of embryonic business model of discovery and vitality that got us going in the mid-90s and really kind of started to take off. But, to your point, that the idea of purpose, of make people healthier, was embedded right from the start. And I, in those days, I'd go when we took the company public, I would talk to analysts and they, it was very much a Milton Friedman world around profits and EVA and embedded value. And I would stand up and say, we're here to make people healthier. And guys, this guy's an idiot, what is he talking? But we kind of stuck with that purpose. The why was make people healthier. The how was this emerging shared value model. And that's really how from the get-go, the organization really formed around purpose and around kind of a social impact. And I think the ability to kind of coalesce that with a hard-nosed actuarial sense of prudence, of how to make this work, the combination, I think, gave us a very, very strong competitive advantage.
How were you able to sort of convince folks that this purpose that you described, because I think it's, I'm sure people are listening saying, it's one thing to have purpose, but it's another thing to be able to convince people that there's a connection between your purpose and being able to succeed in the market, as a business. And so this idea of shared value, is really kind of embedded deep in what you're talking about. But how were you able to convince people that having a purpose wasn't just a nice idea or sort of fluff?
The purpose was fluffy. It sounded fluffy. We believed it. But as you say, stakeholders, had a cynical view of this. But I think the key issue we didn't have the sophistication to understand this is about shared value, etc. The manifestation of the purpose was the product. So the hardcore issue was people bought a product from us that was lower. The price points were lower, and they had these fantastic incentives to do healthy things and get all kinds of stuff, air miles and lower premiums and discounts on there. We created a consumer engaged product it was clunky in the 90s, and we didn't quite have the technology yet. So the point is that the manifestation of the purpose was a product that worked, was fun and engaging, and so it just really captured market share. I will tell you, we had a lot of it wasn't a simple ride. At that stage, the concept of prevention was not well established, and we had a lot of how can I say, the existing industry was critical, that you're wasting healthcare dollars on incentives. We figured out actually that we were kind of using the profit from the change in behavior to fund the incentives and creating this virtuous shared value cycle. But at that stage, the data was not well established. And we faced a lot of criticism from kind of, the healthcare establishment around, are you wasting healthcare dollars on things on the side? Regulators were probing, is this wasteful? Is it, etc. So your point is a very good one. It wasn't a slam dunk, but I would say to the consumer level, the link between purpose and product, was completely established by the actual product. It wasn't a sidebar issue. It was a clear manifestation.
Yeah, so you were able to be clear with the consumer, who were your, the ultimate people you were looking to sort of influence. I wonder, we can't talk about things related to health now, today, on October 1st, without, talking about the global pandemic that we are experiencing, everywhere, which is really upending things as we know it. I'm wondering, has Discovery been able to be responsive in a different way to the COVID global pandemic because of this purpose and the make people healthier? Does that give you a different point of view that allowed you to respond differently, you think, than others?
Well, I think there are a few things. I think that this societal position in the organization has made us kind of in the society, in the communities we operate in the UK here and other markets with our partners. We're in 24 markets around the world now. It gave us a moral positioning that we were helping government in our country here to deal with COVID. So we've been very involved in the actual command center, the app, for example, that with Google and Apple, the track and tracing app we developed for them with Google and Apple. But the critical thing about the shared value model is it encourages physical activity. Mm-hmm. And a lot of healthy things that we now know are critical around mortality and COVID. So all the stuff that we developed actuarially, the incentives to do, we had NCDs in mind at the time, non-communicable disease. But in fact, what COVID has taught us is that the very things that make you susceptible to NCDs make you susceptible to infectious diseases. So what we did with the shared value model is we brought a lot of that stuff into the home. So when people under, lockdown at home, we brought a whole lot of stuff, we work close with Apple around the world, using Apple Watch in the home, using devices, using platforms, incentivizing people to do healthy things at home. We incentivize healthy food as part of our program. So we provided much bigger discounts on healthy food to get people eating healthy at home. So both at a policy level and at a kind of a product level, we adjusted our offering in a COVID world. And then we used the data to ascertain who's extremely vulnerable. And we reached out to them. So we managed about 30,000 really extremely vulnerable people, out of our couple million client base here around being healthier. So there's a multitude of things, but I'll tell you, when you creating value and you can share it, you can then direct those incentives to, where the crisis is. So we've done that. We're going to do that now with the app, the track and tracing app, around trying to incentivize people to use it. As you'll probably know, one of the issues with these apps is people just don't download them and use them. So we're using the shared value incentive and our partner network to try and do that. So the entire mindset around shared value and purpose has kind of, given us a framing for our response to COVID.
Well, you just mentioned that, as part of this, you also used your data to be able to identify folks that you thought might be especially vulnerable and to figure out a way to sort of connect and reach out to them. And I'm wondering if you could connect that to, certainly here, but I'm sure in South Africa and really across the globe, that the kinds of social injustices that have led to the kinds of differential impact of COVID across our communities is been made evident by this. They were there before, but now they've been made evidence. And Adrian, I'm wondering what's been the implications of that for how you approach your health and wellness model? How have you all been thinking about those sort of social and structural determinants of health that actuarially, have a really big impact on people's health and well-being? How have you approached that?
Well, I guess the core issue is in our model is to try to bring the prices of life and health insurance down for consumers. If you can do that, you create inclusivity. That's the key issue. And if they're in our model, we can make them healthier. So the entire focus here is the simple idea of bringing price points down. And then when people are in our system, we make them healthy and you get a virtuous cycle. So in most of the markets we operate in, we're trying our best to bring price points down with our partners or in our own markets here in the UK. And I think fairly successfully. So if you look here, we are the largest provider of health insurance to the low income sector. We have about, 500,000-600,000 families that we cover, right at the bottom, kind of at the tier, just for public healthcare. And I would say to you that was achieved through the shared value capability. The kind of inherent profitability of the health plan allows that kind of lower end reach. The other point is, I think incentives, if correctly structured, obviously lower income find incentives potentially more powerful. So you may have more effect by offering incentives. But these things are not simple. There are simple behaviors and complex behaviors. In many markets we're in certain markets like China, where we work with Ping An, which is one of the world's great insurers, in health insurance, initially, just the concept of health insurance on its own was a fairly complex sale, so to speak. It's a nascent market. So now complicating that with incentives makes it difficult. So phase one was just basically offering health insurance that you could sell at scale. Now that model is working, introducing incentives, into that space and offering the shared value model. So these things are phased. These things are not simple, Lauren, and they're repeatable in different markets, but they've got to be localized and understood around local norms and cultures and expectations. Nothing is simple.
Not a one size fits all approach.
No, it's not. It's not.
I wanted to pivot to something that you also alluded to, which was around innovation. And it seems like a key element of your success was trying to figure out an innovative ways of, getting to these better health outcomes in a different way. Can you speak a little bit to the folks that are listening about how you thought about innovation and what other companies could learn from how you harnessed and embraced it?
I mean, just specific to our model, what happened is the kind of the shared value model worked so well that we had a number of partners around the world. Prudential in the UK, for example, wanted the model to work. We partnered them and then bought out our shareholding in that and built Vitality in the UK. But I think one of the breakthroughs was working across the world with a number of AIA in Asia Pacific, Ping An, Sumitomo, Generali, John Hancock in the US, and Manulife. Mm-hmm. Around, if you look at their products, John Hancock, their life insurance products are standardized on the Vitality mm-hmm. methodology of shared value. So essentially, we've kind of rolled out the capability into life and health insurance. We extend into motor insurance, incentivizing people to drive better and healthier. So it's the same repeatable model around using actuarial savings to fund incentives. I mean, the more general point you may be asking about innovation, I mean, I guess the power of our model is right at the front end. It's shared value. It's not a derivative, so to speak. In other words, we are, between us and government, the insurance industry is completely incentivized for people to be healthier. If they're healthier, we're more profitable. So there's no dissonance between us and our clients. And so what we managed to do is create an obvious loop of shared value that is right at the core of the business model. So the innovation is not, adjacent and, underlying secondary issues. It's right at the core of the model. And I think that's why the model has worked so well, because its innovation is right at the core, and it opens up just 1,000 avenues. Every one of these behaviors we're incentivizing, from smoking cessation to prevention to physical activity to nutrition, you will know, is a world of complexity of 5,000 universities studying so right. It's an endless slew of innovation. We've worked well, for example, with Apple and Apple Watch, which is a fantastic device. Essentially, if you're part of Vitality, you get the Apple Watch almost for free. And as you exercise, those incentives pay off the watch. So we've introduced innovations where, in effect, the value you creates like a loss-framed incentive. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I guess trying to make the point at the core of at the core of our business model is the shared value incentive, and it has just opened up, 1,000 opportunities for more and continual innovation.
Well, a link that people often think about with innovation is sort of the disruption, and people talk a lot about what are competitive disruption or sort of productive disruption in industries. And did you see what you were doing consciously as a disruption and how you were approaching it, or was it a conscious thing, like I'm going to disrupt this, or did it just happen that way when you were starting to design things?
I think as an entrepreneur, initially, these things are hunches. You know what I'm saying? They're not complex business models. I'm trying to say. So we had the hunch about incentivizing and making change, and that happened. As we went along, it's interesting. I don't think we ever saw the sophistication of what we were doing. I remember we had this joint venture with Prudential in the UK. It's a UK Prudential, not the US Prudential. And I was quite annoyed. I read a paper, I think in Gartner, around the Pru in the UK doing this complex pricing of risk. Where they, and I was kind of like, geez, these are our partners. Why are they not sharing this with us? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Super sophisticated segmentation of risk pricing. And I was quite annoyed with it, only to find out they were talking about us. In other words, in management speak and in, complex analysis of a model, it looks so different to inside out. You know what I mean? When you're doing it. So they were describing what we were doing.
Recognize it?
I feel like, these guys are, they're our partners. You know what I'm saying? And I think the same thing happened with shared value. It's intriguing. We had Michael Porter here. We had these Discovery Summits. We had Michael Porter as one of our speakers. And he was, I think at that stage, just starting to reveal the concepts of, it's a decade or so ago, the concept of shared value. He was a guest speaker at our conference. And while I was listening to him, it struck me that that's what we're doing.
Right.
In other words, we didn't create shared value as an academic model and we went out to disrupt.
Right. It wasn't
We
a
went on a
recipe that
journey.
you were doing.
Yeah, we went out on a journey of discovering. We probably have 2,000 incredibly smart people. We've hired behavioral economists. We were loaded to the teeth, well, I think, with intellect and capability. I believe that. But I'm saying at the end of the day, it's a journey of discovery, excuse the pun, and
Yeah.
along that journey, oftentimes you find that you've disrupted things in retrospect. And I think what's happened to us is, I think with understanding these framings and these understandings, the model has become much more disciplined. So while it started out as kind of an entrepreneurial reveal, I think what's become today is a very, very complex shared value behavioral platform that we now, I think, understand what it is, and I'll tell you what's interesting is the globalization of our model has been around three things. One is the nature of risk is behavioral. That's an epiphany that to the actual profession took some time to understand. Things are more pre-existing. The second is the power of technology that let us do this. And the third is the power of purpose. These things were intersecting over the last decade. But I will tell you the COVID pandemic has completely and totally accelerated those three things.
How so?
As I said, our model was about NCDs, and now we're seeing with COVID, resilience is about the same kinds of behaviors. In the case of technology, the rush online, digital, has created just massive potential. And this issue of purpose, I would say to you that, if you look today, that's my sense with kind of a collective we around COVID, with Black Lives Matter, with Me Too, there's a social awareness that corporations have got to stand for something. It's authentic.
Right.
I think it makes them, so what's happened to us, I think, is kind of a coalescing of things that are accelerating. And I think we're in a good space around how to do it. So it started out, to your point, kind of an academic, an entrepreneurial journey that was based on hunches and tactical stuff. I think it's matured into a very, very disciplined shared value model, and something we're working hard with our partners around is this idea of shared value insurance or shared value financial services. It was a proprietary product before. It's now a category, and we are more and more talking about it. I mean, Manulife and John Hancock talk about behavioral insurance. We talk about shared value, but we are collectively trying to change financial services into something that changing behavior, creates value, and we need to share it. And how best is that done?
Well, I understand that there was an unexpected outcome that came out of helping people live longer and healthier lives. Share with folks what that was and what did you do about it?
Well, I hope I'm referring to the right thing. I mean, one thing we found is in kind of retirement funding, people living longer, of course, it's a great thing and they're healthier, but you run out of retirement funding. So one of I think the big opportunities in long-term savings around shared value is there's been a tremendous sophistication on asset management side, on open architecture and passive and active funds, but the ability to guide people around retirement choices and if they do them, sharing value so you can boost their retirement savings is one of the big, I think, open paradigms that exist. The issue of healthy aging is so critical. So one of the avenues that are starting to open to us is kind of this concept of trying to share value in a way that if your life expectancy is longer, there's ways of boosting retirement savings. So to an extent, there's a matching of behavior. And so these are all, I don't know how you see it, but I found if an innovation is profound, all things tend to work in the right direction. You know what I'm saying? There's no dissonance. The solutions are simple. They come out simply. They're not easy to do, but they are directionally clear.
Right. You have a compass. You have a sense of the direction, so it's not confusing. One of the things I want to, and then I want to sort of pivot so folks can ask questions, because I know that people are queuing up with all sorts of questions they want to ask you is, and you started to talk a little bit about this, how you were well positioned before COVID because of your focus on purpose and the elements that were pillars in your work. So I think you've given a lot for people to learn by sort of your example, but I wonder if you could look back, 20 or I guess now almost 30 years ago, what would it be a piece of advice that you'd give you now would give yourself then?
It's a great question. I guess we're fortunate. I mean, I hope it doesn't sound patronizing, as if we did everything right. I think the starting point on purpose and values, I think it was done on a fairly simplistic level without any insight into what it really meant, but it was a profound step for us. And so I think that starting out a business, you've got to make profits, you've got to pay your shareholders, you've got to show some kind of return on capital. These are critical things. But I think that if you can mix purpose with profit in a successful way, that's one of my biggest learnings. I think that North Star of the purpose, and every single thing we've done since then has been consistent with that drive, has created our success. I'm not sure, hope it doesn't sound, arrogant, that I have nothing to learn. I may be saying, just fortunately, we started out focused on this. And I think that with the same team and the same smarts and whatever, I think without that purpose, we would not be here. I think it's a powerful North Star. It's a powerful tactical North Star.
Well, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think it's has such meaning at a time when the debate or the increased interest, as you talked about, in companies having a purpose, being able to state it explicitly, and then being able to show how they live it. So it's one thing to sort of state what your purpose is, but then it's a completely different thing to be able to live it. So I think and because it seems like consumers are able to detect that difference, right? They can detect if there's space between what you say and what you do. So that's really important. Some questions that are coming in. So I'm going to share one that came in, which is, and this one says, governments that are resistant to more socialist views don't hear the key messages regarding social determinants of health. Do you have any ideas about the language and key messages needed to persuade decision and policymakers who are afraid of appearing or concerned about appearing, socialist, if they pay attention to those things? The behavioral elements and the context in which that behavior talks about.
It's interesting. I'm not sure I'm answering the question. It's a complex question. I think that in the shared value model with healthy behaviors and somehow pricing that into healthcare systems or into insurance systems is intuitively very, very powerful. We have found when we, for example, in the US, every state has different laws about how you can do these kinds of things in social systems and insurance systems. And we found generally that there's just an intuitive nature that this is the right thing to do. So we haven't found ourselves in very complex ideological debates around, is it on one side of the market or the other. There seems to be a very established, how can I say, acceptance of this. I would say to you as well that I think what we've had is data. Crucially, if you have the ability to share with policymakers, that's my experience, data that illustrates correlations and causality. If you can do that, then you're shifting, I think, the narrative away from right or wrong to what works and what doesn't work. So whether we've worked in Japan or we've worked in complex states like California or New York, where there's complex views about these kinds of things, or in Germany, where there's very tricky views about data, given the past and how that may be used, and people are very concerned about privacy of data.
Right.
In all of these markets, we've managed to execute very, very well. And I'd say, I hope I'm answering the question. The question is a much deeper one, but I think the issue of the ability to shift the debate away from, ideological issues to issues of saving lives and making people healthier and illustrating data that will do that. That's an important narrative. And I think you've got to be, my view, we've worked in the UK, often work, interface with the NHS on different issues, there's a lot of complexity in the UK about private medical insurance versus the public NHS, which is a massive thing in the UK. I think generally sticking to our purpose, sticking to sharing our resources, our data is available, etc., creates a bridge that you can work, I think, with policymakers and hopefully get better results. I think if you come at this ideologically, you don't get past it. That's my experience. I hope that's helpful.
Well, I think that makes total sense, and that sort of being really clear about that North Star and being able to sort of redirect that idea about making people healthier is beyond or above or separate from any particular ideology. And it's hard to question with that or to have a problem with that. One question that I have is, you found a way to use incentive to persuade consumers to do something good for themselves and you. do you see similar applicability for the nonprofit world to persuade people to do more good for society? How might we take advantage of this? So applying shared value, not in a commercial or a business setting, but
it's a tough question. I mean, I think the issue here we have in our model, it's not profit or not profit, it's revenue. You know, so whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, if you have revenue and that revenue is enhanced by behavior change, you can share that upside with consumers. You know, so we've worked with a city in another country where the city actually wanted to use some tax revenue to actually get people to behave slightly differently. We worked with partners, grocers, and others to try and do that. So there are those kinds of approaches. I think if you have absolutely no revenue to play with, it's hard to fund the incentives, you know, for change. I think it's difficult. And I think the crucial thing is, just to make the obvious point about behavioral economics, is people don't make the right choices just based on educational knowledge. We know that from hyperbolic discounting. You've got to actually incentivize change. You know, you've got to kind of almost, you got to create an immediate benefit for change. And often I think you need some kind of incentive. I would guess that if the not-for-profit or the cause is good enough, it's probably possible to find corporates that will help you. You know, I said our track and tracing app here in South Africa. We're working with corporates around will they give discounts on, you know, telcos, on data costs, etc., for people to use it. And we're getting a very good response. So my sense is if the not-for-profit has a very, very powerful social purpose, you may find corporate partners who will offer benefits to people in that cause that you can then pivot off in terms of incentives and share the social value being created. But we've got a lot of experience with that. We'd be happy to share it.
Yeah, well, that's good. There definitely were a bunch of questions coming up on that. Adrian, another set of questions that I see popping up are around innovation. And so people are obviously you're speaking about innovation has hit a nerve. And so there's multiple folks who are asking about how do you build that in, or do you build that into training discovery employees? Do they learn about it? Are they exposed to it? How do you, in other words, is there a way that you're bringing innovation into with your regular employees across the organization?
I mean, a few points again. These are not rules. I don't know. I hope I don't feel patronizing. I don't know the answer to these things. You know, I'll give you our experience.
Right. Well, that's what people want. No one's looking for this to be like, you know, etched in a tablet or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So a few things. I think the framing of the shared value model and the yearning to apply it to different things, you know, from life insurance to health insurance to auto insurance to now banking, creates just a natural runway that all of our people are continuously trying to find ways, you know, to kind of progress. The other issue is, I guess, that we've created a number of academic kind of, how can I say, pressure points, you know, powerful innovation conferences in our group once a year. So we have now probably 500 or 600 people from around the world that meet every year, present papers around the shared value insurance model. And the stuff that's come out of that, you would not believe, you know, the most remarkable stuff that has come out of that, you know, so pressure points. And then something in our organization has done very well. This may sound kind of trite, but it works unbelievably well, is a cadence of launches that are time-based. In other words, we have an annual cycle of product launch, right? We don't know what that launch will be, but the date is booked, right? And therefore what happens is the organization is on a cadence of continuously, you've got to get ready. These things take years to get ready for. You know, whereas I think many organizations are kind of event-based. A competitor launches something and now, geez, we've got to respond to this. So let's go, you know, we are on a kind of a cadence of once a year. In fact, we had our South African launch just this week. It took probably the whole year to actually prepare for it. But the stuff that came out of it has been quite remarkable. So and then I would just say to you, it's incredible when you frame something in a, you know, our shared value circle and how it works and whatever. You wouldn't believe the stuff that our people come up with around this concept of shared value. They interpret it in the most incredible ways that you know what I'm saying? So I think, again, the kind of the singularity of purpose, the focus on it and the model creates something that people hang all their ideas off, you know? And if you can wrap that with a kind of a pressure points and a cadence, I think you do get a culture of innovation, you know.
But it seems like you've built it into sort of what's valued and what's expected and what gets noticed. That's sort of innovation and forward thinking. So that's
Absolutely.
That can be really important to do. And in fact, one of the questions that came through was, how can a person working with a conservative life insurer message or communicate the shared value model to leaders who are risk averse and who like to stick to the way things have always been done?
I mean,
I see a little smile there. You're an actuary. You know how these actuarial people are.
I do.
You're
And
speaking to your people.
I know how it works. I'll tell you what's happened with us. We've partnered around the world with some of the greatest companies. And the reason is exactly this issue, that the DNA of kind of customer engagement and changing behavior is not suited to a transactional business where they collect premiums and pay claims. You know, it's a different mindset. Having said that, the world is changing so quickly. We are finding that, take for example, the actual fraternity or the financial fraternity, understanding this stuff is actually, to your point, it's actually about mitigating risk. If you attack this as, I've got an amazing idea, it's going to be fluffy and people will love it, I think you're on the wrong thing. And this is about, embedded value, these are actuarial terms, or value of new business, that we're going to enhance this, and reduce the risk. And I would guess again, I think COVID around resilience and what these things are, I think if you demonstrate that, I think that financial services companies are realizing that behavior change is at the core of their ability to mitigate risk. So what I think used to be a kind of, how can I say, a progressive to an actuary, this is bizarre stuff, I think it's changing to something that is now part of the curriculum of how you manage risk, frankly. So I think that mindset will change.
I'm hearing you say, take it out of the language of something that might appear disconnected and reframe it and put it in the language of something that is not just appears to be relevant, but is materially relevant, to the folks that might be risk averse, and sort of talk about, well, this is how you can manage and decrease risk in a way that then piques their curiosity, right? Because it gets to where they are.
I hope this is not a too far a reach, but it's to the earlier question about countries and ideology about healthcare systems. I think the concept is powerful enough that in both scenarios, illustrating data, illustrating, talking the language, not getting caught in the ideology, whether it's to, the board of an insurance company or to a, healthcare system somewhere. I think illustrating the power of the model to mitigate risk and make people healthier. Once you get across it, there's no dissonance, and it's good for society and good for profit, or it's good for the healthcare system. I think you get better results. I think if you're caught in a paradigm of ideology or framing, I think you get into difficulty. I mean, that would be my sense.
Well, here's a good question. All right, these have been warm-ups. Here's a good one for you. How do you feel about the private sector stepping into the social contract, something that the government has usually led on, when the public doesn't have any controlling rights? That is, they can't vote on private sector shared value programs, but they're having an impact potentially at scale, or in your case, definitely at scale. Yeah. How do you think about that?
Look, I have to say to you, in our country, that's a necessity. Government doesn't have the resources, to provide social systems for the entire country. So you've got an economy here where government, rightly so, is focused on providing basic services across a very broad spectrum of society, and relies on the private sector to provide social security systems, be they health insurance or life insurance or long-term savings for retirement. So, outside of, might be a US-based question, outside of the US, I think just the lack of resources means that the public sector often steps into things that the public system cannot do. I mean, my sense of it gets back to purpose as well. I think if a public sector company is doing that, it has to have a North Star. Its governance must be exceptional. Its transparency must be exceptional, so that society gives it the social contract that, and gives it the credibility that it needs to fulfill its role. I think if you are doing that and you are at odds with the regulatory authorities and you're pushing the boundaries, and, I think that will work for a limited time. So I guess I'm answering the question by saying, I think in many countries that is a necessity. It's not an option. Governments can't do it, and therefore private actors step in. And my advice would be that we've seen is, I think to do that requires a very clear purpose, governance, set of values, and a way of acting that society gives you that social contract, you know,
Right.
else you won't do it successfully. You know, we are today nearly 60% of the private healthcare system. So 60% of people in our country who are covered by us. So we've really got a market share here that, you know, the model has worked so well. But, you know, the governance of the trustees of the health plan are entirely independent. There's no conflicts. There's no, you know, in other words, the laws are very, very tight. So, but the use of data has got to be absolutely meticulous, whether it's HIPAA or GDPR in the, you know, in the EU, whatever it might be. If you ever in any way are questioned about morality or governance, I think you've broken that contract. You know, it's got to be very carefully done.
Yeah, that's wow. That's a great answer and a great way of thinking about that it is that trust. I mean, you're talking about what are the components that earn and give you the space to be able to operate, and that trust and the transparency, I think, that you talked about is really important. There are a couple questions that came through about resilience, and this one is around how resilient have your employees been as they've navigated a new way of working through the pandemic and the lockdowns? Are there opportunities to change your operating model based on what's been learned through this new way of working remotely or not having meetings in person? I mean, all of the new ways we've had to do it. I think people are asking, have you learned something there that you can take with you even as this evolve, you know?
Yeah.
As at one point, we're going to be past this, I hope.
Yeah, it's a great point. Look, we've had 12,000 people around the world working from home. I mean, it's, you know, like most companies are doing. We functioned incredibly well, you know, and so I think we've learned that I'm not sure that you should take a view that people are either at home or in the office. I think what we're learning is that work will be much more flexible. And it's something we should embrace. You know what I'm saying? I think we're seeing a lot of stuff that works much better. People are more flexible in many ways, and things that don't work that well. I think doing new things, meeting new people, inducting new people into it is much harder to do. But having pretty intimate meetings with a tight group of people on a Zoom call or a Teams call, I found to work very well. You know, there's no waste of time. You know, so a lot of stuff we're learning, I think, quite well. So I'm not sure. I think this is a massive social experiment. I wouldn't declare victory one way or another. And a point I heard in a webinar, I believe very strongly, we kind of think I am concerned about, we're living on existing social capital. You know, the stuff we're trading here across the Zoom call it's stuff we built up over time. You know what I mean? I'm not sure it's easy to do. I'm not sure it's easy for I think for a new business to break into a market at distance, I think is difficult. For an incumbent, I think it's good. This thing favors incumbents, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I know the answer to it. We've worked well. Something we've done really well. We've had these webinars. It's been remarkable. We've had a weekly webinar with the most unbelievable. We had Scott Kelly, you may know, the US astronaut.
The astronaut,
Spoke to our staff about isolation, you know, in the space station. You know, we've had the Olympic champion in the UK, one of our Vitality ambassadors, give all of our staff a kind of a physical workout on Zoom one morning, you know, in a webinar. So we've done stuff that ironically, our people have felt more as a collective than they actually did in a physical head office, you know. So, but I'll tell you one thing, I hope again this doesn't sound simplistic. I think the power of purpose when physicality is gone is even more so. We're bound by a purpose rather than a physical head office, so to speak. And I think we've done well. But your point is, I don't know how long it lasts, and I hope it's going to be soon.
Yeah. Well, and you know, companies, you know, like our own are thinking like, well, we're not in our offices now, but what will offices look like when we go back? Like, what will that, you know, do we need to go back? Should we be thinking, you know, differently about how we gather ourselves and our human resources together? So I think this is going to be an ongoing dilemma.
Learning.
So the next question is around global growth, and it says global growth and understanding new localities, which you talked to a lot about. You're not able to export your approach without a deep understanding of what the context is and the culture, et cetera. So this person is saying that kind of approach requires partnerships. What have you learned about effective partnerships, especially around your affinity partners, and what have been some lessons that you've learned in forging those partnerships? Were there any missteps or things that you would have done differently, I think?
I think it's deep in the DNA. I think to partner effectively requires a very deep it's a competence, I think. You know, I really think it's a corporate competence. I'm not saying it comes easily. I think you've got to apply your mind to it and develop a value system around it. I think, again, the issue of values and integrity with partners, especially in different cultures, is crucial. You know, so we have made a real kind of emotional values commitment to being a good partner. You know, and that requires having a relationship that's not transactional. There are going to be some things you do that cost you money. You know.
So what does that mean? Like, how do you do? Like, how would your view of partnership differ than what you might see peers or other folks, you know, in the sector?
Well,
doing?
I think that we are obsessed with making sure that we work, for example, at the C-suite. No partnership of ours is anywhere below that. Now, that's not an issue of arrogance. The issue of, if you don't have a corporation or partner that's committed at the C-suite level, I don't think this is going to work. You know, so the level of commitment of our partner has to be absolute at board level, at C-suite level. Also, it's too complicated to get this to work. I think that's critical. The other point is that while we have a contractual relationship, if we ever revert to the contract, I think all things are lost. You know, you've got to develop quickly deep relationships where there's trust. With one of our partners, we rolled out Vitality in a adjacent business entirely for free. We built it and helped them get it done, with a view that over time it would work and it would then spread. In fact, that's what has happened. So banishing a transactional kind of partnership, if I do this, you've got to pay me. And I think good partners tend to do that. But I think also embracing cultures, you know, in a different way. And then I think you've got to have governance structures. I know that sounds bureaucratic, but you've got to have certain governance structures that you know work. We have, with all our partners, an annual summit at the C-suite level. So we meet with them ideally in their boardroom for 6 hours with the CEO and their team around, you know, what's happened, what is our R&D agenda, what are they experiencing, how can we help? So there's, you know, I hope it doesn't sound artificial, but you do need governance structures that are well-worn, that work, and you repeat and scale them. So I don't know there's a specific answer, but I think the point made is, I do not believe you can scale globally in our kind of business on your own. You've got to work with partners. We've learned that. You've got to have that local knowledge. Some things work everywhere, and some things definitely don't work everywhere. They work only in one locale.
Right.
Well, one thing
about partnership, Adrian, is that sometimes people might, you said, you know, it's not about being transactional, but I'm sure there have been times where there might be some skepticism potentially of like, why are you looking to partner with us? And is it going to be mutually beneficial, or is it going to be more extractive, that, you know, you're going to get our insights into the country and our connections and our, you know, but, you know, what are we going to get? Has that ever happened that, you know, people have been like, I'm not sure I want to partner with you, or is it, we've been able to sort of start with no bad preconceptions about maybe partnerships that people have experienced before that were more transactional or were more extractive?
I think there's two necessities here. We have a unique set of capabilities that our partners, to the previous question about the life insurer, our partners don't have the DNA to do it. And they have scale and we can't have in the local. So there's kind of a starting point of a real symbiotic relationship. But then I guess there's also track record. You know, so if you're partnering well with an AIA or a John Hancock, you know, your next partner feels a sense of comfort, you know, that these people are good partners and they know what they're doing. So, you know, I'm kind of, it's 101 stuff, but the art of partnering is a very, very important thing. And I think but like the social issue, if you ever lack integrity, or you ever, you know, do something that is bad partnering, I think it has a kind of a Pareto effect, you know, in the tail of the entire business. So you've got to be meticulous, you know, in partnering. It's a massive, massive competence, I think.
Well, it certainly seems like now, you've used so many, you know, you talked about integrity and you talked about meticulous, and you didn't say specifically the word ethics, but I certainly see that in what you're talking about. And certainly this has been a time, I think it's fair to say, where sometimes people have a jaded view about business and the corporate sector, that there isn't integrity, or that there isn't, you know, that. And I wonder, you know, you all are having to fight that battle in some ways, right? Of saying like, no, this is different. We're having a different approach.
Look, I think COVID has created like a foxhole we're all in. You know what I'm saying? We don't really have the luxury, I think, to be kind of, whether it's, and especially countries outside our country here in South Africa, you've got a continual need for interaction between government and private sector, and you've also got just a mistrust of it ideologically. So the ability to break these boundaries down is just an ongoing battle. It's not a simple thing to do. Yeah. But I think you've got to do it meticulously. I made the point about our track and tracing app. I think we've done a good job with government, and we've tried our best to do everything, again, meticulously, ethically, to your point, not trying to extract. It's cost us a lot of money. We're not trying to do it for profit. It's not transactional. We're not trying to extract anything. And hopefully policymakers say, these are good guys, we can trust them, and we can maybe trust others. So again, it's not a simple thing, but I think that the world is, the blurring of boundaries between public and private, I think, is a good thing. If that's one of the things that come out of COVID, we all in this thing together. There's a collective sense at the moment. It may wear off, post-COVID, but it's maybe time to build bridges if you can.
Yeah, in anticipation. Well, as we're starting to wrap up, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you would want your legacy to be. And I'm not meaning to suggest that you're anywhere near where you need to be retiring, because I looked you up and we're the same age. So it's like, it's not that. But what do you want your legacy to be? Like, what do you want people to remember and think about? Why you are on the planet? Like, what was your contribution?
We're moving our way through financial services, from health insurance to life. We're now moving into banking. We're doing a lot of stuff around the world. I would, and I think the great thing of our model is that partners are doing it, and I think others are copying it, even if it's not with us. So to an extent, I think if we can create a financial services category of shared value that transforms financial services globally, that would be a massive thing. We have a goal of touching 100 million people by 2025. And when we get there, we're probably at 25, 30 million, so we're moving. But could we transform models of financial services into sharing value and creating behavior change for the better? I think it's possible. And I think if that would be an incredible legacy, not just for me, but for our team, that coming out of a country far away with its own kind of social problems, because of those problems, has creates a model that is globally relevant. So I mean, that would be a fantastic legacy. It need not be done by us, frankly. If it's emulated and copied, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Do you want to just speak a word about that? Because there were some questions about the financial services. Do you want to just speak a little bit? You seem very it's so exciting what you're thinking about.
Well, I think if you look at banking, it's the same thing. There's just a few behaviors in health insurance.
In terms of savings, or in terms of
default on credit. In other words, if you think about mortality curves actuarially, default curves in banking are the same things. They're behavioral aspects of how people manage their finances. So incentivizing people to manage their health well, there are 4 or 5 key behaviors. Incentivizing people to manage their money well, there are a few behaviors around retirement funding, budgeting, unsecured debt. The data shows that. So exactly the same model of using incentives. If the bank is more profitable by virtue of people's behavior, you use that profit to offer them better rates of interest, all kinds of stuff that we're doing and I think mobile, the banking on the face of a mobile phone offers such incredible power. So it's exactly the same model, just applying behaviors to default curves rather than behaviors to mortality curves. I hope it doesn't sound, actuarial, but at the end of the day, you're creating an economic model that works. And for the customer, you're creating real incentives to manage money well. So these things have, and the same thing with auto insurance in our markets where accident rates and death rates are high, incentivizing people to drive safer and better and pricing that into the insurance. We offer them discounts on their gas, on their fuel bills if they actually drive better. It's super powerful. So these are the same, it's exactly the same model, the same vitality model, applied in just different silos of financial services. It's great for society. There's no downside.
Right. Well, I think it seems like in all of the examples you mentioned, auto insurance, finance, and certainly in health, having an understanding of the context in which folks are going to be behaving or using or choosing to use or not use the incentives that you're that you're putting out there, seems like it's really, really important. So that deep understanding of, well, what are the behavioral options that are available, to people, you talk about healthier eating as an example. You know, what is the access that people have to the healthier foods that you're incentivizing them, you know, to eat in it, or, you know, the healthy, do they have banks that they can actually go to? You know, in the US, that's a big problem for us. There's a lot of communities that don't have banks just because they've been disinvested. So it seems like this understanding of purpose, but also understanding that context in which the incentives, those behavioral nudges have to happen.
Absolutely. Totally agree, totally agree. But I do think the technology, taking banking with mobile, the ability to get tools to people, especially in underserved areas, and with, you know, to train, incentivize, guide, educate, is much more powerful than ever. And you can do real social good.
Yeah, no, that's for a pediatrician, I'm incredibly interested in sort of folks who are unbanked or who, you know, have to go to check cashing, those kinds of places, because they're losing so much income, you know, in those ways. So
absolutely,
this is really exciting. So I'm really interested in hearing more about it. But Rima has come on, which I think is a very subtle way of saying, Adrian, that you and I are about to be cut off. I could ask you, you know, there's so many more questions. It's been just such a pleasure to hear how you're talking about it. And I feel so excited and energized by your constant coming back to the purpose piece. And I'm sure that the folks who've been listening in have heard that, and I'm hoping that they'll leave with that, because I'm taking away this sense of that's got to be clear, and that's not an add-on. That's core infrastructure.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time.
Yeah, Rima.
Yes, thank you, Lauren and Adrian. This has been a wonderful conversation. And if you could only see the chat and the Q&As that we've had come through, it would have blown you away. So Lauren, thank you for leading us through this conversation today. The recording for everyone who is online and those who will be downloading it later will be made available on our sharedvalue.org site. I want to say a really deep, sincere thanks to my colleagues on the SVI team, especially to my speaker series partner, Alicia Dunn, as well as our colleagues, Georgie, Sam, Imani, and our managing director, Bobby Silton. And again, from SVI and FSG, thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope we see you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.